It was a Saturday in October. One of those days where the sky is almost too blue, too bright, like the world forgot it was supposed to feel heavy. I had taken my son Marcus to Riverside Park. Not because I wanted to be there. I took him because he needed to run. Because 8-year-old boys aren't meant to sit in quiet houses, surrounded by the kind of silence that a dead person leaves behind. We'd been there maybe 40 minutes. Marcus was on the swings, pumping his legs, working hard to get higher. I was on the bench just watching him. That's most of what I do now. I watch him. I look for her in the way he moves. My wife Elena passed 14 months ago. Ovarian cancer. 11 months from diagnosis to the end. We didn't have time to prepare, though I'm not sure you ever really do. She was 34. She was the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday, who kept a spare umbrella in the car for other people, who made our house smell like something warm just by being in it. After she died, the house stopped smelling like anything. I was still on that bench, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold, when I noticed the little girl. She was standing near the entrance to the wooded trail at the far end of the park. Small, maybe 6 years old. Dark curly hair pulled back with a clip that was halfway falling out. She wasn't running. She wasn't playing. She was just standing there, very still, looking in one direction and then another, the way a person does when nothing around them looks familiar. She was crying. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind that means a child has already been scared for a while and has started to go numb with it. I stood up without really deciding to. I looked over at Marcus, still swinging. I walked over slowly, hands in my jacket pockets, trying not to alarm her. "Hey," I said, stopping a few feet away. "You doing okay?" She looked up at me. Green eyes. A very specific shade of green that I recognized immediately in my chest before my brain even registered it. She shook her head once. Just once. "Are you lost? Are you looking for your mom or dad?" She nodded. A tear moved down her cheek. She didn't wipe it. By then Marcus had drifted over, curious. He stood just behind my elbow, quiet for once, reading the situation the way kids sometimes do when they understand something is serious. I crouched down to her level. "What's your name?" She sniffled. "Ivy." "Okay, Ivy. My name is Daniel. That's my son Marcus. We're going to help you find your mom." "All right." She looked at Marcus. He gave a small nod, solemn as a little judge. She seemed to decide we were acceptable. I asked her if she knew her phone number. She didn't. Her address. She shook her head, her brow pulling together hard with the effort of trying to remember something useful. "Anything about your house?" I said. "Anything you can picture?" She thought for a long moment. Long enough that I started to think there was nothing. And then her face changed. Something came back to her. "We have a big lilac bush," she said quietly. "Right by the front door. My mom says it smells like vanilla. She says it's the reason she bought the house." I stayed crouched. I didn't move. Somewhere behind me, I could hear kids laughing on the playground. A dog barking far off. Wind moving through the oak trees at the edge of the park. The lilac bush that smells like vanilla. Elena had said those exact words to me. Not once. Many times. She'd grown up in a house on the other side of town, a Victorian on a quiet tree-lined street. And the thing she always came back to, the detail she returned to every time she talked about her childhood home, was that lilac bush by the front door. The one her mother said smelled like vanilla. The reason, she would say with a small smile, that she could never walk past a lilac without stopping. I stayed very still on the outside. On the inside, I was trying to do the reasonable thing. I was trying to tell myself it was a coincidence. That lilac bushes were common. That lots of old houses had them. That grief does things to your mind, makes you reach for patterns that aren't really there. But I stood up, and I looked at Ivy, and I said, "You know what? I think I might know that house." We walked to my car. Marcus climbed into the back seat next to Ivy without being asked. I buckled her in. I sat in the front and gripped the steering wheel for a moment before starting the engine. It was a 20-minute drive across town, and I had no idea what I was driving toward. I've driven across that part of town maybe 3 or 4 times since Elena died. Always by accident. Always on the way to somewhere else. And every time, I take a different route home just to avoid passing her old street. It's not that I couldn't handle it. It's more that I didn't see any reason to make things harder than they already were. Grief is a strange thing. It doesn't always hit you in the big moments. It hits you in the Tuesday afternoons. The left turn you didn't take. The song that comes on when you're pumping gas. I'd learned, in 14 months, how to manage my exposure. So as I drove, I was very aware of where I was going. I was aware of the neighborhoods changing, the streets getting quieter, the trees getting older, the houses getting a certain look to them, wide porches, sloped roofs, the kind of architecture that doesn't get built anymore because it takes too long and costs too much. In the back seat, Ivy and Marcus had started talking. I wasn't trying to listen, but the car was quiet, and small children don't have a setting between silent and completely audible. "How did you get lost?" Marcus asked her. "Our dog Pepper saw a squirrel," she said. "She ran into the trees, and my mom chased her. She told me to stay on the bench. But then there was music, and everybody was standing up, and I couldn't see the bench anymore, and I walked the wrong way." "That happened to me once at the mall," Marcus said. He was being generous. He wanted her to feel like it was a normal thing. I made a note of that quietly. "Are you scared?" he asked. "Not anymore," she said. "Not as much." A pause. "My mom has curly hair like yours," Marcus offered. "Is she at the park too?" A beat of silence. I kept my eyes on the road. "No," he said. "She died." Ivy didn't say sorry the way adults do, reflexively, to fill the space. She just said, "Oh." And then after a moment, "My grandma died too. My mom still gets sad about it sometimes." "Yeah," Marcus said. "My dad too." I adjusted my grip on the wheel and said nothing. That was the thing about the 14 months. Marcus had gotten very good at saying it plainly. She died. No softening. No euphemisms. Early on, right after, I tried some of those. She passed. She's gone. She's not with us. And one afternoon he looked at me very calmly and said, "Dad, you can just say she died." He was 7 at the time. He'd gotten that from Elena. She was the same way. Direct. Not cold. Warm. Actually, extremely warm. But she believed in calling things what they were. She didn't like vagueness. She had no patience for a conversation that was trying to avoid its own subject. I'd love that about her. I still do. I turned onto her old street without consciously deciding to. My hands knew the route. I'd driven it dozens of times over the years, picking her up, dropping her off, visiting her parents in the last years before they passed, sitting in this same car in this same seat feeling completely at home in a neighborhood that wasn't mine. Her parents had passed within 2 years of each other. Her father first, then her mother. And after that, Elena had told me the house had been sold. She hadn't gone back. She'd said once, not with bitterness but with a kind of gentle acceptance, that some places are meant to hold a version of you that doesn't exist anymore. And it's okay to let them go. I thought about that a lot after she died. The street looked the same. That was the strange thing. The world had completely rearranged itself, and this street still had the same oak trees, the same uneven sidewalk squares, the same row of old mailboxes in slightly different states of repair. I drove slowly. I wasn't sure exactly which house I was looking for. In my memory, it was about 2/3 of the way down on the left. A 2-story Victorian, wide wraparound porch, white with dark green shutters. Before I could ask Ivy anything, I heard her shift forward in her seat. "There," she said. Her voice had gone up. Relief and recognition mixed together. "That's mine. That's my house." I stopped the car. I looked at the house. White. 2 stories. Wraparound porch. Dark green shutters. And there, just to the left of the front door, enormous and ancient and slightly overgrown, a lilac bush. Even from the car, in October, even with its leaves thinning out, I could see what it must look like in May. What it must smell like. My chest did something I didn't have a name for. I sat there for a moment longer than I needed to. "Daddy," Marcus said, quietly. He was watching me in the rearview mirror. He knew something was happening, even if he didn't know what. "Yeah," I said. "I know. Let's go." I got out of the car. The two of them scrambled out ahead of me. Ivy was already moving up the front path, her feet quick with the certainty of knowing exactly where she was. Marcus followed her the way he'd been doing since the park, a step behind, quietly keeping pace. I followed them both. The air near the porch was different. That's the only way I can describe it. The lilac wasn't blooming. It was October, but there was still something in the air near it. Something underneath the smell of fallen leaves and cool earth. Something sweet and faint and completely, devastatingly familiar. Ivy pressed the doorbell. I heard it ring inside the house. I heard footsteps. And then the door opened. I want to be careful here about how I describe this because I know how it sounds. I know that grief makes you see things. I know the mind finds patterns, fills in gaps, turn strangers into ghosts when you want them badly enough. I knew all of that standing on that porch, and it didn't help. The woman in the doorway was not someone who resembled my wife. She was not a vague likeness or a trick of the light or a passing resemblance that I'd inflated with wishful thinking. She was, in every visible way, Elena. The same green eyes. Exactly that shade. The same slight tilt of the head when she registered something unexpected. Her hair was shorter, a neat, practical cut instead of the long ways Elena had kept. But the face. The face was the same face. The one I had looked at across 1,000 ordinary dinners. The one I had memorized. She was looking down at Ivy with an expression that shifted from alarm to relief to something confused and uncertain as her gaze moved from her daughter to Marcus to me. When she looked at me, I couldn't speak. Ivy had already wrapped both arms around her legs. "Mommy, I got lost, but they helped me." The woman, this impossible woman, put a hand on Ivy's back automatically, the way a parent does without thinking. But her eyes stayed on me. "Are you all right?" she asked. I realized now that she must have seen something alarming on my face, because her voice had that specific careful quality, the way you talk to someone who looks unsteady. I opened my mouth. I closed it. Marcus, standing just behind me, slipped his hand into mine. "He's okay," my son said, very seriously, to this woman who wore my wife's face. "He just gets sad sometimes." She looked at Marcus. At his eyes, something moved across her expression that I couldn't read. "Would you like to come inside?" she said quietly. And it wasn't a social courtesy. It was something else. She was asking because something had registered for her too. Something she hadn't sorted out yet. "I think," she said slowly, looking between us, "that maybe you should." Her name was Renata. She told me that within the first 2 minutes, after we'd stepped inside, and she'd guided the kids toward the kitchen with a plate of apple slices and the quiet efficiency of a mother who knows how to create a pocket of calm for children while adults deal with something complicated. "Renata Voss," she said, sitting down across from me in the living room. She said it the way people do when they want to establish something solid. "A name is a fact. A fact is a place to stand." "Daniel Okafor," I said. She nodded slowly. She had her hands folded in her lap, and she was watching me with those eyes, and I was doing my level best to look at the room instead. At the furniture I didn't recognize. The photographs on the wall that showed a family I'd never seen. The evidence of a life that was entirely hers, entirely separate, entirely real. It helped a little, grounded me. The house was different on the inside than I remembered it. Elena's parents had kept it a certain way. Heavy curtains, dark wood, the organized clutter of two people who'd lived somewhere for 40 years. Renata had opened it up. Light walls, simple furniture, children's drawings in mismatched frames along the hallway. It felt lived in a different way. Younger, less settled. But the bones were the same. The layout, the way the light came through the side window in the late afternoon. The slight creak of the floorboard just inside the front door. I'd stepped over that creak 100 times without thinking about it, and my foot had found it automatically when I walked in. Renata had noticed that. I saw her eyes drop to my feet for just a moment. "You've been in this house before," she said. It wasn't accusatory. It was careful. "Yes," I said. "A long time ago. It belonged to my wife's parents." A pause. "Your wife," she said. "She passed 14 months ago." Renata was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry." "Thank you." She looked toward the kitchen. We could hear Marcus explaining something to Ivy in that detailed, slightly lecturing way he had. Something about how squirrels plan ahead and store food. Ivy was apparently very interested in this. When I opened that door, Renata said carefully, turning back to me, "The way you looked at me." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry about that." I stopped. "Tried again. You look very much like her. More than I would have thought possible." She held that for a moment. "How much like her?" I reached into my jacket pocket. "I carry one photograph. Just one. It's from our wedding day, taken under the big oak tree in the park, 3 years before Marcus was born." Elena is laughing at something just off camera. Her eyes are bright. Her hair is loose. It's one of those pictures that managed to catch a person exactly as they were. I held it out to Renata. She took it with both hands. She looked at it for a long time. Long enough that I started to hear the clock on the wall. Long enough that the sounds from the kitchen got quieter, as if even the children sensed the temperature of the room had changed. Her hands had gone very still. "This is," she started. "My wife," I said. "Elena Okafor." Nay, Elena Marsh. Renata set the photograph down on the coffee table between us. She didn't let go of it right away. Her fingers rested on the edge. Elena Marsh, she repeated, very quietly. Then she stood up. She said, "Give me one moment," and walked down the hallway toward the back of the house. I heard a door open, the sound of a closet or a cabinet. Then quiet. I looked at the photograph sitting on the table. Elena laughing. Caught mid-sentence, probably. In the middle of some joke I no longer remember, but would give a great deal to hear again. I picked it up and put it back in my pocket. Renata came back, carrying a small cardboard box. The kind that copy paper comes in, repurposed for storage, the top slightly bowed from the weight of whatever was inside. She sat down and placed it on the table where the photograph had been. "I've been in this house for 4 years," she said. "I bought it from an estate sale. The family. I was told it had been a couple, no children, and they'd both passed. I fell in love with it the first time I saw it." She paused. "The lilac bush, actually. The realtor said it bloomed in May and smelled like vanilla. I put in an offer the same afternoon. I didn't say anything. About 6 months after I moved in," she continued, "I found this box in the attic, tucked behind some old insulation. It had clearly been left behind. I went through it because I thought there might be something that needed to be returned to the family." She looked at the box. There was nothing with a last name or a clear address. So I kept it. I told myself I'd figure out what to do with it eventually. She opened the box. Inside, loose and layered without much order, were papers and photographs. Old ones. The kind with the slightly faded, oversaturated color of photographs from the 80s and 90s. She lifted out a small stack and placed it on the table. I leaned forward. The top photograph was of 2 teenage girls, sitting on the front porch steps of this house. The lilac bush behind them, younger than it was now, but recognizable. Both girls were laughing, leaning into each other, squinting against the sun. They were identical. Same face, same build, same posture. One of them had longer hair. The other had hers cut short, tucked behind her ears. My breath left me. The one with the longer hair was Elena. I knew her at 17 the same way I knew her at 34. The shape of her, the way she held her shoulders, the angle of her laugh. The other one was Renata, sitting 3 feet away from me, 20-something years younger, in a photograph she had never seen. "I don't recognize either of them," Renata said, watching my face. "Do you know who they are?" I looked up at her. "One of them is my wife," I said. "The other one," I stopped. I set the photograph down very carefully, and I looked at Renata. Really looked at her. The eyes. The slight asymmetry of her smile. The shape of her jaw. "I think," I said slowly, "the other one might be you." The room got very quiet. From the kitchen, I heard Ivy say something and Marcus laugh. A real laugh, surprised and genuine, the kind I hadn't heard from him in a long time. Renata was looking at the photograph. She'd picked it up herself now, holding it with both hands, tilting it slightly toward the window light. Her expression was the particular kind of still that means a person is working very hard to stay composed. "That's not possible," she said. But her voice had a question in it, not a certainty. "I know," I said. "I've never been in this house before I bought it. I don't have any family connection to it. I grew up in Columbus. I was adopted as an infant. I don't," she stopped herself. "Reset. I don't have any siblings. I was told I was an only child." The word adopted landed between us like a stone dropped into still water. I thought about what Elena had told me years ago, sitting in our kitchen late at night, the particular way she'd described her own adoption, how she'd known from very young, how her parents had been open about it and loving about it, and she'd never felt any less theirs. How she'd sometimes wondered, briefly, the way adopted people do, whether there was someone out there who looked like her. She'd said it casually, not with longing, just as a thing she'd wondered. I had never thought to wonder who that person might be, or whether the world was small enough to answer the question. "You were adopted," I said. "Yes." So was Elena. Renata put the photograph down on the table between us. We both looked at it. 2 identical teenage girls on a porch, laughing in the sun, completely unaware of anything. "We need to know," she said. Her voice was steady. "Whatever this is, we need to know." "Yes," I said. "We do." I thought about Elena's attic. I thought about the things I hadn't been able to go through yet. The boxes I'd been avoiding for 14 months because opening them felt like a kind of finality I wasn't ready for. And I thought about something she'd told me once, a small detail, the kind you file away without knowing why, about a box her adoptive mother had given her. A wooden one. For her 18th birthday. Elena had said her mother told her it held the truth of where she came from, and Elena had never opened it. She'd said the life she had was enough, that the past felt like something that belonged to someone else. I had always respected that. I had never pushed. But the box was still in our attic. I was almost certain of it. There might be something, I said carefully, at my house, something Elena kept but never opened. Renata looked at me. Something that might explain this? I don't know, I said honestly, but it's the only lead we have. She looked at the photograph one more time. Then she looked at the kitchen doorway, where we could hear the kids still talking, easy and unhurried, the way children make friends, without any of the complicated machinery that adults require. Okay, she said. She stood up, straightened her jacket, and called toward the kitchen in a voice that was calm and completely normal. Ivy, honey, we're going to take a little drive. My house is 20 minutes from Renata's. I've lived there for 6 years. Elena and I bought it together, a year before Marcus was born, and we spent the first 3 months painting every room a color she'd picked out from a little fan of swatches she carried around in her purse for weeks. The kitchen is yellow. She chose it on a Tuesday afternoon, holding the swatch up to the afternoon light coming through the window, and she said, "That one, that's the one," like it was obvious and always had been. I haven't repainted anything. I pulled into the driveway and sat for a second before getting out. I do that sometimes. Just a moment of preparation. It doesn't really help, but I do it anyway. Renata pulled in behind me. She'd followed in her own car. Ivy buckled in the back. Practical decision. Neither of us said much about the logistics of it. We were both operating on a kind of quiet forward momentum, the way you do when you've agreed that a thing needs to happen and the only question is how quickly. Marcus jumped out and ran ahead to the front door. He knows the code for the lockbox. I taught him last year, after I realized there were scenarios, school pickup confusion, a missed bus, a day I wasn't feeling well, where he needed to be able to get in on his own. He punched it in without slowing down, pushed the door open, and disappeared inside. I walked up with Renata beside me. She didn't say anything when she stepped through the door. She looked around the way people do when they're trying to take in a space without being obvious about it. The entry hall, the coats on the hooks, the small table where I put my keys, where there's still a ceramic dish Elena bought at a craft market that has her handwriting on the bottom for keys and other important things. I watched Renata's eyes move across the room. I watched them stop on the framed photograph on the wall at the end of the hall. It's a large one. Elena at the coast, 5 years ago, standing at the edge of the water with her shoes in her hand, looking back at the camera. She's not posing. I called her name, and she turned, and I took the picture before she could arrange herself into a smile. It's just her face, mid-turn, completely unguarded. Renata stood in my hallway and looked at a photograph of someone who wore her face and had her eyes and had been dead for 14 months. She was very still. "I'm sorry," I said. "I should have warned you. There are a lot of—" "No," she said quietly. "It's all right." She took a breath. "It's all right." I gave her a moment. Then I said, "The attic is this way." The attic stairs fold down from a panel in the ceiling of the upstairs hallway. I hadn't pulled them down since sometime before Elena died, possibly longer. I reached up and unlatched the panel, and the stairs descended with the particular complaint of something that hasn't moved in a while. A dry, wooden groan, dust shifting in the light. Marcus appeared at the end of the hall, Ivy right behind him. "Can we come?" he asked. "Stay down here," I said. "Find something to do." He looked at Ivy. She shrugged. They retreated toward his room, apparently satisfied with this, already negotiating something about Legos. I went up first. Renata followed. The attic is the part of the house I'd been avoiding the most deliberately. I'd been up there once since Elena died, in the first week, looking for something practical, the warranty folder for the furnace, and I'd come back down after 4 minutes and hadn't gone back since. It's not that it's full of her things. It's that it's full of the things we hadn't gotten to yet. The boxes we'd carried up there with good intentions, the furniture that was always going to be refinished, the bags of outgrown baby clothes that were supposed to go to donation and never made it out of the house. It's a room full of deferred plans. Plans that now had no completion date. I pulled the cord on the overhead bulb, and the room came into dim yellow light. It smelled like old wood and dust, and something faintly sweet that I've decided not to try to identify. Renata stood near the top of the stairs and looked around slowly, taking in the covered furniture, the stacked boxes, the general quiet disorder of a life interrupted. "What does it look like?" she asked. "The box. Wooden. Small. Hand-carved," she said. Her mother gave it to her. I started moving through the room carefully, reading the labels on the cardboard boxes. Most of them I'd written myself when we moved in. Asterisk books, living room. Winter coats. Marcus. Baby. Asterisk a few were in Elena's handwriting, which I was not completely prepared for, but managed. I worked my way toward the back corner. That was where I remembered it being, or thought I did. Elena had mentioned it once, and I'd filed the information away under her past, her decision, the way you do with things that belong to your partner and not to you. Behind a stack of photo albums, pushed back against the slanted wall where the roofline came down, I found it. It was smaller than I'd imagined. Maybe the size of a shoebox, but thinner. The wood was dark, close-grained, with simple carved lines running along the edges, not decorative exactly, more like the kind of careful detail someone puts on a thing to show they made it with attention. There was a small brass latch on the front, tarnished to a greenish brown. No lock. I carried it out from the corner and set it on top of a flat-top trunk near the center of the room, under the bulb where the light was best. Renata came to stand beside me. We both looked at it. "She never opened it?" Renata said, "Never." She said her mother told her it held the truth of where she came from. Elena said she didn't need it, that the life she had was enough. Renata was quiet for a moment. "My adoptive parents didn't give me anything like this," she said. "I always assumed there was nothing to know, that the records were sealed and that was the end of it." Elena assumed the same thing, I think. She didn't want to pull on the thread. "And you never pushed?" "No." Renata looked at the box, then at me. "Is it all right if? I mean, technically it's all right," I said. "Open it." She unlatched the brass clasp. It was stiff with age and took a moment of pressure before it gave. She lifted the lid. Inside, the box was lined with fabric. Dark blue, the kind that had probably been vivid once and had faded to something softer over the years. It had the faint smell of cedar and something floral, dried out and faint. On top, folded in a neat square, was a piece of paper. Cream-colored, slightly thickened at the folds from being opened and closed many times before being folded away for the last time. Renata lifted it out, unfolded it slowly. It was a letter, handwritten, 3 paragraphs, in a small, controlled script that pressed hard on the downstrokes. She read it without speaking. I watched her face. I saw the moment it hit her, a small tightening around her eyes, a barely perceptible stillness that moved through her whole body. She held the letter out to me without saying anything. I read it. It was written by Elena's adoptive mother, dated August of the year Elena turned 18. It said that she had wanted Elena to know this from the beginning, that she had argued for it from the day they brought her home, but the agency and the laws of the time had made it impossible. It said that Elena had not come into their family alone, that she had been born one of 2, that her sister had been placed with another family, a good family, she had been assured, a loving family, in the same city, and that the decision to separate them had been made by the agency and not by the birth mother, who had wanted them kept together and had not had the power to insist. It said, "I have prayed every year since that you would somehow find each other. I don't know if this is something you will ever want to pursue. That is entirely yours to decide. But I could not let you go through life not knowing that somewhere out there is a person who began the same way you did, on the same day, in the same room. Her name at birth was recorded as Baby Girl B. We were told she was placed with a family named Voss. I stopped reading. I looked up at Renata. She was watching me. Her eyes were full, but she hadn't let it go anywhere yet. She was holding it the way she'd been holding everything since we met, carefully, with both hands, keeping it contained. "A family named Voss. That's your name?" I said. "That's my name," she said. We stood in my attic under a single yellow bulb with a box between us and a letter that was almost 30 years old, and the thing that had been impossible 2 hours ago became simply, undeniably true. There was more in the box. Beneath the letter, 2 small items wrapped individually in tissue paper. The first was a hospital bracelet. Plastic, brittle with age, the kind placed on newborns. The card inside read Baby Girl A. The second, also a hospital bracelet, read Baby Girl B, and beneath those, a photograph. Black and white, slightly overexposed, the way hospital photographs from that era often were. Two newborns side by side in a single bassinet. Identical in the way that only one kind of person can be identical to another. Wrapped in the same striped blanket, their faces turned slightly toward each other, the way they must have been positioned from the very beginning. On the back, in the same handwriting as the letter, asterisk Serafina and Rosalind. Born August 14, 1991, asterisk Renata made a sound that wasn't quite a word. She pressed two fingers to her mouth and looked away for a moment, at the wall, at nothing. I stood there and held the photograph and thought about Elena, about all the times she'd talked about that particular quality she had, the feeling, she used to call it, of looking for something she couldn't name. She'd said it lightly, as a small personal quirk, never with weight. She'd said she'd gotten good at ignoring it. I thought about the fact that the answer had been in a box in my own attic the entire time we were married, that she'd carried the key to her own question from her 18th birthday onward and never used it, that she had died not knowing. That is the part one have had to sit with. I won't pretend it's easy. After a while, Renata carefully refolded the letter. She placed the bracelets back in the tissue paper. She laid the photograph on top and closed the lid of the box and latched the clasp. Then she straightened up and looked at me. "We should do a DNA test," she said. Her voice was steady, practical. She was thinking in steps. To confirm it officially. "Yes," I said. And then, she paused. "I don't know what comes after and then. I've never had a sister. I've never had any family besides Ivy. Neither had Elena," I said. By the end, Renata picked up the box, held it against her chest, both arms around it. "She never knew," she said. Not as a question. "No." She nodded once. A small, deliberate nod, the kind that means I'm going to carry this carefully. "Then we know for her," she said. We came down from the attic. I folded the stairs back up. In Marcus's room, the kids had indeed found the Legos and were deep in something architectural and apparently very serious, based on the level of focused silence coming from behind a half-open door. I put the kettle on because it was something to do with my hands, and because the afternoon had gotten into that late-day cold that seeps through old window frames. Renata sat at the kitchen table, the yellow kitchen. She looked at the walls and then at me, and something in her face softened slightly for the first time since we'd met. "She picked this color," I said. It wasn't a question. "I was going to say," Renata said quietly, "that I almost painted my kitchen this exact shade last spring." She paused. I didn't, in the end. I couldn't decide. I set 2 cups on the counter and didn't say anything to that. There wasn't anything to say. There was only the particular silence of 2 people sitting in a yellow kitchen at the end of a day that had rearranged everything, waiting for the water to boil. The DNA test results came back on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after that first afternoon. I was at the kitchen table when the email arrived. Marcus was already at school. The house was quiet in the particular way it is on weekday mornings. The specific stillness of a place that has had people in it, and now doesn't. I'd made coffee. I hadn't drunk much of it. I opened the email. I read it once. Then I read it again slowly, the way you do when you want to make sure you're understanding something correctly and not just seeing what you expected to see. The result was unambiguous. The laboratory language was careful and technical, and it took 3 paragraphs to say what could have been said in 1 sentence. Renata Voss and Elena Marsh Okafor were identical twins. I sat with that for a while. The coffee went cold again. I don't know exactly what I'd been expecting to feel in that moment. Some kind of release, maybe. A clean click of confirmation, the puzzle piece settling into place. But what I actually felt was quieter than that and more complicated. It was something close to grief again, but a different chamber of it. The kind that comes not from losing something, but from understanding the full shape of what was lost. Elena had a sister. She had an identical twin sister who had grown up 20 minutes across town, who had bought her childhood home without knowing it, who had a daughter with Elena's eyes. And Elena had lived her entire life, her whole bright, full, generous life, without any of it. I closed the laptop. I sat in the yellow kitchen. I looked at the window. Then I picked up my phone and called Renata. She answered on the second ring. I could tell from the background quiet that she was also alone. Ivy was in school too. We'd fallen into a kind of parallel rhythm over the 3 weeks, the 2 of us, without planning it, texting in the mornings, updating each other on small logistical things, the DNA timeline, the name of a family records researcher a friend had recommended, a document she'd found when she went back through the cardboard box from her attic. It had been careful, practical. Neither of us had pushed past what the situation required. There was a lot we hadn't talked about yet, and we both seemed to understand, without saying it, that the results needed to come first. That we needed the fact before we could deal with what the fact meant. It came back, I said. A pause. And, she said. Identical, I said. Another pause. Longer. Okay, she said. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the effort underneath it. Okay. Are you all right? She stopped. Started again. I knew. I think I've known since you showed me that photograph. But knowing and having it confirmed are two different things. Yes, I said. They are. She was quiet for a moment. I heard her exhale slowly. I keep thinking about the fact that she never knew, she said. I keep coming back to that. Not the separation, not the agency, not any of it. Just, she went through everything she went through and she never knew I existed. I know. Does that make you angry? I thought about that honestly before answering. It did, I said. For the first few days, yes. Then it became something else. I'm not sure what to call it yet. I think I'm still in the angry part, she said, without apology. That's fair, I said. You've had less time with it. We met that Saturday, at her house, which had also started to feel like a neutral territory, a place that belonged equally to both histories. We sat in her living room the way we had that first afternoon, but with less shock between us now and more of what I can only describe as the specific weight of confirmed truth. Renata had printed the results. 2 copies, one for each of us. She'd also laid out on the coffee table everything we had gathered over the 3 weeks. The letter from Elena's adoptive mother, the hospital bracelets, the photograph of the 2 newborns, the photograph of the 2 teenagers from Renata's attic box, and a timeline she'd put together herself on a yellow legal pad. Dates, names, what we knew, and when we confirmed it. She'd done it methodically, column by column. Her handwriting was small and even. I looked at the legal pad and thought, Elena would have done this exactly this way. The same instinct for organizing a problem into its visible parts. The same practical tidiness applied to something that was anything but tidy. I didn't say that out loud. Some observations you keep. We went through everything together, systematically. This was not a conversation about feelings. That wasn't what the morning was for. It was an accounting. We laid out what we knew, what we could document, what remained uncertain. We talked about the birth mother. We didn't have her name. The letter from Elena's adoptive mother hadn't included it. The hospital records from that era were sealed, and we'd been told by the researcher that pursuing them would require either a court order or a direct petition to the state registry, a process that could take months and offered no guarantee. We decided to file the petition. We decided it together, without much debate. Not because we needed more confirmation of what we already knew, but because Renata said, quietly, that she wanted to know where she came from. All the way. And I thought Elena would have wanted the same thing, even if she'd spent a lifetime deciding she didn't. So we filed. There was one other thing we needed to deal with. I'd been thinking about it for most of the 3 weeks, turning it over, trying to figure out the right way to approach it. It wasn't complicated exactly. It just required care. Marcus knew something significant had happened the day I brought Ivy home. He was 8 and observant, and he had watched his father's face very closely in the doorway of Renata's house, and he had understood, in the way children understand things, that the woman inside mattered in a way he couldn't fully name yet. He'd asked me that evening, carefully, in the way he asked difficult things, indirectly at first, circling toward it. Is she someone you know? Asterisk sort of. Not exactly. Asterisk she looks like Mom. I know. Is she related to Mom? He was 8. I gave him the honest answer. Asterisk we think she might be. We're going to find out. Asterisk he'd gone quiet after that. Processed it for a few days. Then one morning at breakfast he'd said, without preamble, if she's Mom's sister, does that make Ivy my cousin? Something like that. Yes. He'd nodded and gone back to his cereal, apparently satisfied. But I'd noticed that he'd started referring to Ivy by name in casual conversation, which he hadn't done before. Just working it in, getting used to it. Kids are often better at the mechanics of change than adults are. They don't have the same resistance. They just want to know the shape of the new thing so they can figure out where to put it. The harder conversation was with Renata, not about logistics. About the thing underneath the logistics that we had both been careful to navigate around for 3 weeks, keeping the focus practical and forward-moving, because the practical things were easier and there was enough of them to keep us busy. It happened on the same Saturday, after we'd finished going through the documents. The kids were in the backyard. We could see them through the window. Marcus had found a stick of some kind and was doing something with it, and Ivy was watching with the particular focused attention she gave to things she was deciding whether to join. Renata made tea. She brought it to the table and sat down and wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at me. "Can I ask you something?" she said. It wasn't quite a question. "Yes." "What is this?" she said carefully. "For you." "Because for me she's my sister. She was my sister and I never got to know her, and that is going to be something I carry for the rest of my life. But for you she was your wife. That's a completely different thing, and I want to make sure I understand what I'm asking of you. When I ask you to tell me about her, when I look at you and see someone who knew her in a way I never got to, I thought about this. It deserved a real answer. It's not the same kind of grief," I said. "You're right, but it's not entirely different either." I paused. "When I look at you, I've been honest with myself about this. It's not easy. You look like her. Exactly like her. That's a fact I have to be present with every time we're in the same room." Renata nodded. Steady. She'd asked an honest question and she wanted an honest answer, not a managed one. "But," I continued, there's something in it that doesn't feel like loss. That's the part I've been trying to understand. When I came to your door that first afternoon and I saw you, the thing I felt underneath the shock was not grief. It was something closer to. I stopped, looking for the right word. Recognition. Like something had been returned, even though it wasn't the same thing and I knew it wasn't. She held that for a moment. "Elena used to talk about a feeling she had," I said. "Something she was always looking for that she couldn't name. She'd bring it up occasionally and then move past it. She never made it heavy, but she mentioned it enough that I remembered it." Renata's expression shifted very slightly. "I have that too," she said. "I've had it my whole life." She paused. "I've never told anyone that." We sat with that for a moment. Outside, Ivy had apparently decided to join Marcus's activity. Whatever it was, it had gotten louder and more enthusiastic. There was laughter. "I can tell you about her," I said. "Whatever you want to know. All of it. The whole thing. I think I would like to. I haven't been able to talk about her the way she deserves. The people around me are careful with me. They keep it gentle. But you don't need me to be gentle about it." Renata looked at me. "No," she said. "I don't." "Then I'll tell you everything," I said. "As much as you want. For as long as it takes." She nodded once, picked up her tea, looked out the window at the children. "Okay," she said. "Start from the beginning." So I did. I started with the first time I saw Elena, in the lobby of a building where we both had appointments on the same floor and the elevator was out of service, and we ended up climbing 4 flights of stairs together, and she talked the entire way up without seeming to notice she was climbing stairs, just completely absorbed in an observation she was making about the way cities design their interiors to discourage human contact. I hadn't gotten a word in. I had not minded at all. I told Renata about the first date, which was supposed to be coffee and became a 4-hour walk because neither of us wanted to go inside anywhere. I told her about the yellow kitchen, the whole story, the Swatch fan, the Tuesday afternoon, the exact quality of light she was checking it against. I told her about the way Elena laughed, which was always slightly too loud for whatever room she was in and completely unself-conscious about it. I told her about the last good day, which was a Sunday about 3 weeks before the end, when Elena had insisted on going to the park and we'd sat on a bench in the sun for 2 hours and she'd fallen asleep against my shoulder and I'd sat completely still for 40 minutes so I wouldn't wake her. I told Renata all of it. She listened without interrupting. Her tea went cold. The afternoon light moved across the room in the slow way it does in October. Outside the window, the children's noise shifted and settled and shifted again. By the time I finished, the yard had gone quiet. I looked out and saw Marcus and Ivy sitting cross-legged in the grass facing each other, close enough that their knees were almost touching, talking in the serious, private way children do when they've decided they trust each other. Renata had been crying for a while, quietly, in the way she did everything, contained, deliberate, allowing it without performing it. "She sounds like someone I would have argued with constantly," she said finally. Her voice was rough at the edges. "She would have loved that," I said. Renata laughed. A small, involuntary sound surprised out of her. It was the first time I'd heard her laugh. It was Elena's laugh. The same pitch, the same slight breathiness, the same quality of being slightly too much for the room. I looked out the window so she wouldn't see my face. After a moment, I had it back. She would have loved that very much, I said. The state registry responded 4 months later. It came as a letter, not an email, which surprised me. Thick envelope, official seal, the kind of correspondence that announces its own weight before you open it. It arrived on a Wednesday in February, tucked between a utility bill and a catalog I hadn't asked for. I stood in the driveway in my coat and held it for a moment before going inside. I called Renata before I opened it. That felt right. It belonged to both of us equally, maybe more to her, and I wasn't going to read it alone. She was at my kitchen table within 20 minutes. She'd driven over still in her work clothes, a jacket she hadn't bothered to change out of, her keys still in her hand when I opened the door. That was the most unguarded I'd seen her. She set her keys on Elena's ceramic dish without thinking about it, the way someone does when they know a place well enough to move through it without looking. We sat at the table. I slid the envelope across to her. "You open it," I said. She looked at it, then at me. "Are you sure?" "Yes." She picked it up, used her thumb to break the seal carefully, the way you do when you don't want to damage what's inside. She unfolded the letter and smoothed it flat on the table with her palm, a slow and deliberate gesture, and then she read it. I watched her face the way I'd learned to over the past months. The small signals, the slight tightening at the eyes that meant something had landed, the controlled breath that meant she was managing something. When she finished, she turned the letter around and pushed it across the table to me without speaking. The state registry had located the original birth record. The birth mother's name was Catherine Elaine Marsh. She had been 22 at the time of the birth, unmarried, a student. The record noted that she had requested, in writing, that the twins be placed together. The request had been overruled by the agency on the grounds that twin placements were statistically more difficult and that 2 separate families had already been identified. The record further noted that Catherine Marsh had formally objected to the separation and had asked to be contacted if either daughter ever initiated a search. The registry letter informed us that Catherine Marsh was alive, that she was 60 now, living in Portland, Oregon, that she had been registered with the state's mutual consent database for 26 years, which meant she had been waiting, actively and on record, for 26 years for exactly this contact. At the bottom of the letter was a contact information release form, signed by her, granting permission for the registry to share her address and phone number with any biological family members who came forward. Her phone number was printed at the bottom of the page. I sat with that for a while. Renata was looking at the window. The February light was thin and gray and came through the glass at a low angle that made everything look both sharp and somehow distant. "She's been waiting," Renata said, not with bitterness, with something more like wonder. The plain, quiet wonder of a fact too large to immediately absorb. 26 years, I said. She tried to keep us together. A pause. They wouldn't let her. No. Renata pressed her lips together, looked at the phone number, looked away again. "Elena would have wanted to contact her," she said. It wasn't a question. "I think so," I said. "Eventually." "Yes." "Then we should." She paused. "If you're willing." I know she wasn't. I know Catherine isn't she's the mother of my wife, I said. "And she's your mother." "That's enough." Renata picked up the letter, folded it carefully along its original creases. "Set it down. I've never spoken to a birth parent before," she said. "I've thought about it. Over the years I've thought about it. But I always stopped at the thinking." "What stopped you?" She considered this honestly. "I didn't know what I was looking for," she said. "I didn't know what I needed from it. It felt like opening something I couldn't close again. And now," she looked at me. "Now I know what I'm looking for," she said. "I'm looking for Elena." She called on a Thursday evening, 10 days later. She'd wanted the 10 days. To think through what she wanted to say, to prepare herself, to decide what questions she was going to ask and in what order. She'd told me this matter-of-factly, and I'd said take whatever time you need, and she had, and when the 10 days were up she called me and said she was ready. She didn't want me on the call. She was clear about that, not unkindly. This first conversation was hers. I understood. I told her to call me after. She called me 2 hours later. I was in the living room. Marcus was in bed. The house was quiet. I answered on the first ring. "How are you?" I said. "I'm a pause. A lot of things." Her voice was different than I'd heard it before. Something in it had loosened. "She cried," Renata said. From the first sentence. She already knew about Elena. I don't know how. She'd been following. She said she'd been searching periodically over the years, and at some point she'd found a record of Elena's marriage, and then she stopped. She knew. She'd known for months that one of us had died. She said she'd been carrying it since she found out. I let that settle. She wanted to know everything, Renata continued. About both of us. She said she'd imagined us so many times, who we'd become, what we'd look like, what we did with our lives. She said she used to look at strangers on the street sometimes and think, not really, but think, what if that one is mine? What is she like? I asked. Renata thought for a moment. She's very direct, she said. She doesn't apologize for things that aren't her fault. She said clearly, very early on, that the separation was not something she chose, that she wants me to know that she needs me to know that. She wasn't asking forgiveness. She was stating a fact. That sounds like Elena, I said, before I could stop myself. A beat of silence. Yes, Renata said quietly. It does. Catherine flew in from Portland in March. Renata picked her up from the airport. I was not there for that either. Again, Renata had been clear and I had agreed. That first meeting was not mine to be part of. I was adjacent to this story in the deepest possible way, but I was adjacent. There was a center to it that didn't include me, and I respected that. Renata brought her to the house with the lilacs on a Sunday afternoon. I came with Marcus and a container of food I'd made that morning. Something practical, something that filled time with my hands. I rang the doorbell of a house I'd come to know well over the past months, and Renata answered and stepped back to let us in. Catherine was sitting in the living room. She was 60, with gray at her temples and the kind of face that had been through things and come out knowing itself. She was not tall. She had dark eyes, not green. The green must have come from elsewhere, from someone neither of us would likely ever account for. But something in the set of them, the particular quality of attention in them, was familiar in a way I recognized without being able to explain. She stood when we came in. She looked at Marcus for a long moment. He looked back at her with the steady, unabashed directness he'd had since he was very small. You have her eyes, Catherine said. Her voice was quiet. Certain. Everybody says that, Marcus said. Do they? She smiled. It was a careful smile, held back at the edges. They're right. She looked at me then. And whatever she saw in my face, whatever was there after months of all of this, she seemed to understand it without needing it explained. She didn't say she was sorry for my loss, which I was grateful for. She simply said, "Thank you for finding her." And it took me a second to realize she meant Renata. I didn't really, I said. Ivy got lost in a park. Well, she said, and the careful smile loosened slightly. Then thank you for returning, Ivy. We had lunch at Renata's table. All of us. Catherine, Renata, Marcus, Ivy, and me. It was not a simple meal. It was not uncomplicated or easy or free of the weight of everything that sat around the table with us. But it was also, in ways I would have had difficulty predicting 4 months earlier, ordinary. The children ate quickly and asked to be excused and were back in the yard within 20 minutes. Catherine asked about Marcus's school. He answered thoroughly and at length, which he does when he finds an adult who seems genuinely interested. And Catherine seemed genuinely interested. Renata was quiet through most of it, but not withdrawn. She was watching, taking in the room. I recognized it because I did the same thing myself in situations I was still learning how to hold. After lunch, Catherine asked if she could see photographs of Elena. We took her to the living room. I had a box of albums that I'd brought over, the same ones from my attic, and we spent the rest of the afternoon going through them. Page by page, I narrated what I could. When, where, what was happening, what Elena had said, what she'd been like in that particular period of her life. Catherine held each photograph carefully. She didn't rush. She looked at each one long enough to actually see it. At one point, she held a photograph of Elena at about 19, college, a trip somewhere, leaning against a railing with a wide, completely unself-conscious smile, and she said, quietly, to no one in particular, "She looks like she made every room better just by being there." She did, Renata said. It was the first time Renata had said anything like that. Direct, personal. The first time she'd claimed Elena out loud in that particular way. Not as a fact to be established, not as a piece of a shared history, just as someone she was already grieving. I turned a page of the album so neither of them would have to look at my face for a moment. The DNA result. The letter. The registry petition. Catherine's contact information, the phone call, the flight from Portland, the Sunday lunch. None of it gave back what was gone. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. No document, no confirmed result, no meeting across a table reverses the thing that happened. Elena was still gone. She still didn't know. Those are facts that live in a part of me that doesn't change regardless of what gets resolved on the outside. But there was something that shifted anyway, not in the grief itself, in the architecture around it. For 14 months, I had been living in a structure that had only one room, the room of losing her. Everything in my life existed in relation to that single loss. Marcus was the son she'd left behind. The house was the house without her in it. Every good thing that happened had the shadow of her absence across it. What happened over those months, slowly and without announcement, was that more rooms opened. There was a room where Renata existed, where I was learning who she was in her own right, not as a replacement, not as a consolation, but as a person. She had her own specific quality of humor, dry and unhurried. That was like Elena's and not like Elena's at the same time. She had her own way of moving through a problem, more methodical than Elena, less intuitive, more patient. She loved coffee and had strong opinions about it. She was a more cautious driver than I expected. She could be quiet for a long time without it being uncomfortable. There was a room where Ivy and Marcus were building something between them that had its own grammar, its own rules, its own running jokes that neither of the adults were entirely privy to. There was a room where Catherine was careful and present and carrying her own version of this loss, the original version, the one that had been there the longest. All of those rooms were connected to the first one. They didn't cancel it. They just meant that I was no longer only in it. One evening in late March, I was back in my own house after a Sunday at Renata's. Marcus was asleep. The house was quiet. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and I looked at the yellow walls. I thought about Elena choosing that color on a Tuesday afternoon. The Swatch fan. The afternoon light. Her certainty. I thought about the fact that Renata had almost painted her own kitchen the same shade, had stood in front of a paint display with a sample card and considered it and put it back. I thought about all the small ways they had arrived at the same places from different directions. The color yellow. The love for that house on the quiet tree-lined street. The particular shade of green that had shown up in Marcus and in Ivy and presumably, somewhere in a city in Oregon, had registered in Catherine's memory as belonging to someone she lost. I sat in the yellow kitchen and I felt, for the first time in a long time, that the house was not only a place of absence. It was also a place of all the things that had moved through it. The people who had sat at this table. The conversations that had happened here. The new ones that would. I put my cup in the sink. I turned the kitchen light off. I walked upstairs in the dark, the way I knew the house well enough to do. It was enough. For that night, it was enough. It's May now. The lilac bush at Renata's house is in full bloom. I didn't know what that would look like until I saw it for the first time last weekend. The whole front of the house covered in it. Dense clusters of pale purple, a kind of color that looks almost artificial against the blue sky. You can smell it from the end of the street. Sweet and heavy and exactly what Elena had always described. Renata planted a second one last fall, smaller, just to the right of the old one. It's not blooming yet. It will take another season or two before it catches up, but it's there, rooted and reaching, doing the slow, quiet work that growing things do. She told me when she planted it that she wanted one for each of them. I didn't say anything at the time. I just helped her dig the hole and pack the soil around the roots and water it in. And then we stood on the porch and looked at the two of them side by side. The old one ancient and full, and the new one small, and just beginning, and neither of us felt the need to make it into more than it was. Some things are already enough on their own. The months between February and now have had a shape to them that I'm still learning to describe. Catherine came back in April. A longer visit this time. 5 days, staying in the guest room at Renata's. I saw her most evenings. We fell into a routine that felt both entirely new and oddly natural. Dinner at Renata's table, the kids doing homework in the next room, Catherine and I talking after Renata put Ivy to bed, usually about Elena, sometimes about other things. She's a reader. She has opinions about books that she delivers without apology. She and Marcus had a long conversation about a series he's been working through, and she'd read one of them years ago and remembered it in enough detail to hold up her end, which earned her considerable respect. She's not a grandmother in any technical sense to either of the children. We haven't tried to name what she is. There isn't a clean word for it, and we've all quietly agreed not to reach for one. The children have a way of absorbing people into their world without requiring a label, which is something adults could stand to learn. She goes back to Portland next week. She'll come back in July. We've made no formal agreements about any of it. We're building something without a blueprint, which means we're building it slowly and checking it as we go. That feels right. There are things I want to say about what this year has meant, and I keep running up against the limits of what language can do with something this particular. I lost my wife. That's the fact at the center of everything, and it doesn't soften with time. It just becomes more precisely shaped. You get to know the exact dimensions of it. You learn where the edges are. But here is what I didn't expect and couldn't have predicted. In the process of losing Elena, I found the part of her that the world had put somewhere else before I ever met her. I found the other version of her face, the other person who had grown up carrying that same unnamed looking for something feeling without knowing what it was. I found out that Elena's childhood home, which I had visited 100 times and said goodbye to when her parents passed and assumed was gone from my life, had been bought by her sister. That her sister had been drawn to it by a lilac bush that smelled like vanilla, which was the same reason Elena had loved it. That neither of them had known the other existed. I found out that two children, one who has his mother's eyes and one who is her mother's mirror, had somehow ended up in the same park on the same October Saturday, and that one of them got separated from her mother, and that I was the one sitting on the bench. I am not a person who uses the word fate easily. I don't have a clean system of belief that accounts for any of this. I'm not going to tell you it all happened for a reason, because I genuinely don't know that, and Elena, who believed in calling things what they were, would have had no patience for a conclusion I couldn't actually support. What I will say is this. The universe did not give me Elena back. Nothing does that. But something in the ordinary mechanics of a Saturday afternoon, a dog chasing a squirrel, a band starting to play, a little girl walking the wrong way through a crowd, arranged itself into something I could not have arranged myself. I got Renata. I got Ivy. I got Catherine. I got a yellow kitchen that doesn't only hold one thing anymore. I got Marcus laughing in the backyard with a girl who has his mother's eyes, the two of them running in the grass between two lilac bushes, one old and one new, both of them growing. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot. On a practical level, the days look like this. I wake up, make coffee, get Marcus out the door. I go to work. I come home. I make dinner. I help with homework. I sometimes drive across town on a weeknight because Renata has discovered that Marcus is inexplicably good at helping Ivy with her math worksheets, which he is extremely proud of and which Renata finds both useful and quietly entertaining. On Sundays, we usually end up in the same place. Sometimes her house, sometimes mine. Catherine, when she's visiting, makes something elaborate in whichever kitchen she's stationed in. She cooks the way she